What's up, guys? Welcome back to Newswave. Closing out last week was absolute insanity for all three companies, Sony, Nintendo, and Microsoft, facing big shakeups, studio closures that have continued to have massive pushback online, but even more information getting out around Bluepoint that makes the whole situation just look worse. And Pokemon Fire Red and Leaf Green did a lot of damage with $20, but coming up on this week, seems like there's going to be quite a bit more to talk about when it comes to Pokemon and Nintendo, but we'll go over all of that and more. Guys, if you enjoy these videos, make sure you hit that like button, helps out a ton, and if you're new here to the Spawn Wave channel, make sure you subscribe down below. Guys, we're every weekday morning, 8 a.m. Eastern time, going over the world of gaming, trying to keep you up to date with the news. So even if you don't get a notification in the morning, just know there's probably a video here for you to check out. And we're going to start today with great news, actually, for Nier fans, as it appears there will be a follow-up to Nier Automata. This game came out in 2017, and it's been a consistent seller through the years, so much so you can see there was a sales milestone reached here. It's exceeded 10 million copies sold. In fact, there's an entire video that was released to celebrate this, along with some really cool looking artwork. But the thing that was strange when you're watching, like, wow, this is going on for a while, several minutes. And then you get to the end and you can see the final frame. Yeah, it says Nier Automata to be continued. So again, awesome to see this happening. We got off of Nier Replicant back in 2021. They did like an updated version for Nier Automata after that, but obviously we go by mainline or just new entries. Replicant being the last one 5 years ago, just about. It does feel like we were getting close to when the next Nier game would be announced, and I guess at this point we can just expect a follow-up to Automata. No other information other than just this frame of it being continued, but that alone is enough for people to get really, really hyped, so really cool to see what they have in store for us there. Also, sticking with sales information, we did get an announcement for Nioh 3, you can see this. Now, this is over on the Team Ninja website. Nioh 3 becomes fastest selling entry in the series with 1 million units sold worldwide. The franchise has now surpassed 10 million units, but I gotta tell you, Nioh 3, I've been playing it, I'm a bit more than 30 hours into this game. It's really, really good. Like, I'm having much more fun with this one than I did with the prior two. Part of that might be so it's more like an open world style game now, but it does it in a way that's not inconveniencing you to where there's just large stretches you always have to run across. There's plenty of fast travel spot, like each little shrine that you can pray at and then replenish your health, like the Souls formula, and respawn all the enemies. There are so many, I think there's like 150 something of these things scattered around the map. And you fast travel around and the map will become more and more revealed as you complete different objectives and explore more, to where it'll just eventually just tell you where things are that will, yes, power you up further. And the whole time, you're just getting stronger and stronger and stronger. So even if you struggle against a boss, you can leave and then come back. Very similar to that breakaway for Elden Ring for Souls games. But for this, with Nioh 3, you just become very powerful and you can smack the boss around a bit better, and even the odds, we'll say. But I really like it. I definitely recommend it. I think this is going to end up being like a 40 to 50 hour game just to play through it casually, and then maybe say 100% or like platinum trophy or what have you, probably another 20 or 30 hours. So there's a lot of game to enjoy here. And if you've been unsure about the Nioh franchise, honestly, this might be the one to jump into even for the first time. Oh, and probably in some unsurprising news, you can see it looks like we do have Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3 on the way, and it is indeed that Age 1000 game announcement. That was kind of weird. It was obviously a code name, and they didn't want to tell us outright that it's Xenoverse 3. However, people were spotting that they added it, that being on their YouTube channel for Bandai Namco Southeast Asia. They added it into a playlist for Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3, that initial Project Age 1000 announcement trailer. They then removed it the next day, but it's a little late. The internet doesn't forget. Screenshots all over the place, and there you have it. We will be eventually having it renamed to Dragon Ball Xenoverse 3, and I guess I'm just curious to see what they're going to do coming off of Xenoverse 2, which is a never-ending game that I think is still ongoing right now, actually, years and years after release, but I guess we'll find out here soon when they're ready to make the real grand reveal for Xenoverse 3. And guys, with some of the quick news out of the way, let's get into the bigger stuff. Let's start right away with a follow-up, an update on the Bluepoint situation, which has gone absolutely insane online, to the point where Sony did post an advertisement basically about Marathon and how we're looking forward to this weekend coming up, where they'll do their big network test and people can try the game out and attempt to stress the servers. The replies didn't go well there. It was a lot of frustration. What are you doing with Bluepoint? why are these studios still open? Why is Marathon still around, but Bluepoint isn't? And so they really haven't said much at all on social media since then. But we are starting to hear some sources around this around what happened within Bluepoint with some information that a little touch and go, I will say, with the sourcing. However, there's no doubt it blew up online because there is so much interest around it. And you know what? Not hard to believe some of the stuff that's being said here, but there is one crucial like window of information that we're missing here, a time period with the whole thing between Bluepoint and Sony. So let's take a look. Now, this is something that was put out on social media by Detective Seeds, and I was going through this. I wanted to point out a few key factors here with the whole thing and how it went down allegedly here. Now, he did reach out to tons of Bluepoint employees apparently through LinkedIn, and a couple of them got back to him, but they wanted to be, of course, anonymous. So again, I guess grain of salt with all of this, but it's not far-fetched necessarily as to what you're about to hear. Okay, so Bluepoint did pitch God of War, the live service game, to Sony, and that's not surprising, as we've talked, for example, on the Click R3 podcast with Ryan about how these studios will pitch ideas to Sony. We know Bluepoint was working with Sony Santa Monica on God of War Ragnarok, and so they were running support on that, and apparently they decided they liked the God of War universe, and they wanted to make an original game but have it in the God of War universe, and I guess they attached live service to it. My speculation on that is they saw that it was a much easier way to get a green light, say, on a project that's going to demand tens of millions, maybe $100 million. You say, hey, it's live service, and at that time, it was probably good to go. All right, well, from that point, they missed several deadlines during development. Not hard to believe, again, because Bluepoint is like 70 or 80 people, and these live service games demand a ton of developers behind them, not only to get them off the ground, but also to continue beyond that. Now, some of these people that were getting back to Detective Seeds did say that they admit they should not have been doing a live service game, and I think we all know that. Obviously, hindsight, but I'd even argue then that's Hermen Hulst's job, is to evaluate and decide if they should, say, tackle a live service game. Well, they had not secured a green light for other pitches since the God of War cancellation. So the last year, well, I'd say about 8 to 10 months, really. They were pitching ideas or concepts to Sony. 4 projects were pitched. 2 of those were remakes. Sony did not greenlight any of these for Bluepoint, but apparently one remake did go to another studio. I thought maybe it could have been that the God of War remake or the trilogy remake that we do now have announced, but apparently it's something that isn't announced yet. So, okay, of course, morale declined, only a matter of time until the studio was closed after all these rejected pitches. And I mean, you come to the table with 4 and every time you're getting shot down. Eventually you're going to go, what's the point? You know, like we're not going to attempt live service. I assume that was off the table then after what happened with God of War. And I guess some of the other ones that it wasn't exactly making Sony jump up and down like, yeah, we got to do this. But that's the strange thing here, okay? So the piece of information we're missing, I think, what were these projects? Because that will really tell us what Sony's mindset is behind the scenes for all of this, as we're still trying to figure out Hermen Hulst and where he sits in all this, because right now, man, Hermen Hulst is not a popular guy online, obviously. We're looking at what happened here with Bluepoint, who, by the way, up until they were purchased by Sony, so in 14 years, they released 8 games before they were purchased by Sony. All right, they also ran support on a bunch of games, and the one game that they had a hand in with when they did, after they were purchased by Sony, was God of War Ragnarok, but they never released a game under Sony. So the big thing that really changed there was them being acquired. Up until that point, they were actually pretty consistent. Every 2 years, even less than that sometimes, a game rolled out to the marketplace from Bluepoint. So all of a sudden, they go to Sony and they can't get a game out in 5 years. It doesn't necessarily add up that it wouldn't be also on the side then of Sony being a major component as to why this whole thing fell apart. So the games that were being pitched by Bluepoint, I think, are very important here, because if they went, hey, Legend of Dragoon, let's try remaking that, and Sony goes, nah, I don't think that's gonna work. Okay, what about Infamous? That game's pretty crunchy on the PS3 and people can only stream it. What if we went back and did like a high-level Demon Souls-like remake for Infamous, see if we can get that franchise off and running again, as then you'd have a superhero game that isn't necessarily reliant on Marvel, and if Sony said no to that, then there are some major questions then for Herman Hulst and people within Sony, because it does seem like they are continuing their push towards live service. And I just don't think that's something Sony needs to really focus in on, because they benefit and profit so much off of already established live service games like Fortnite, Apex Legends, and so on. Eventually you go, man, that's already a lot of money. We kind of don't have to release games and we get a ton of revenue, but then they already have some that are successful like Helldivers 2, and eventually you go, okay, how many live service games do they need before they are just, they're content? And honestly, that answer is probably impossible to figure out, because there is no limit. They would love to have like infinite live service games at this point that are constantly bringing in money, but I just don't think that's reality. And I think it really comes down to who ultimately is responsible for Bluepoint being dissolved at this point, being shuttered. And I mean, you look around and yeah, it'd be Herman Hulst. So it's not shocking that you're probably seeing and gonna keep hearing people calling for Herman Hulst's job, because he has not made the best decisions since really coming aboard. Concord is probably the biggest thing, but I gotta say, just from a consumer-facing, like, Concord lost them a lot of money, but people didn't like Concord for the most part. I'm sure some people did. A lot of people like Bluepoint, and apparently Sony needed to save money, according to Herman Hulst, so 70 to 80 people in that studio are they're just out of work, and Bluepoint's gone. A real shame to see all of that go down, but I am curious to see if we get a Jason Schreier in-depth level investigation, because then I have a feeling he will name some of these titles that maybe were pitched, and at that point, we'll really know where Sony stands. Next up, let's talk about Pokemon Fire Red, Leaf Green, and a big Pokemon Presents that's happening later on this week. Go figure, it's almost like there's something called Pokemon Day coming up. First though, we'll talk about some of the games that just randomly showed up on the eShop, and then they were officially confirmed by the Pokemon Company that is indeed Fire Red and Leaf Green that will be heading to the Nintendo eShop for the Switch and the Switch 2. These games are $20 each. That's right, so $40 total, or $20 for one, and there's multiple different languages for them. They will be released February 27th on Pokemon Day. This immediately sparked all kinds of discussion and controversy around the pricing on these things, people looking at the collector's market and like, hey, this is much cheaper than buying an actual cartridge, and that is true. But on the other side, they're like, hey, that's much more expensive than free, because I can just download these games, and it's like, well, I mean, a car is expensive until you just, rob a bank and then steal it. But the idea here is, yes, these are indeed Game Boy Advance ROMs that Nintendo is, or Pokemon Company through Nintendo, they're just dropping on the eShop. And why are they doing that? They say it's for fun. The obvious answer here is money. Why would they put in the subscription service if the Pokemon Company's main goal is to bring in revenue? They're gonna sell several million copies of each version on the eShop, probably with the flip of a switch, let's be real. On the 27th, it's gonna pour in more money. The pre-orders are already topping the eShop sales charts just about across all these different regions. So that's really why. That's kind of it. And really, people can decide if they want to buy in or not for $20. I think the real interesting thing here is that they announced this a week in advance. Almost like, man, that Pokemon Presents is probably stacked with some other stuff. And this was announced over on the Pokemon website, with the new Pokemon Presents happening February 27th. Again, Pokemon Day makes sense. And that'll be happening 6 a.m. Pacific, 9 a.m. Eastern. And it does appear to be 25 minutes, which is tied for like the longest Pokemon Presents. That happened, I believe, back in 2023. So I am anticipating quite a bit to be announced here. The obvious thing, as well, Fire Red and Leaf Green, that's already been announced, but maybe they'll talk about Pokemon Home support, and if that'll be there maybe post-launch, as it was initially on the eShop page, and then it was pulled down later after the official announcement. A big miss, by the way, if they don't have Pokemon Home, as that I think would be a huge selling point for people to be able to move Pokemon from Fire Red and Leaf Green on the Switch and Switch 2 into, well, Home for the cloud storage, but then also into the newer versions of the game, maybe even with something like Gen 10, which is Wind and Wave based on leaks, and that should be fully revealed this Friday. And there's been a lot of chatter around these actually being, I guess, more impressive than you'd expect from Game Freak and the Pokemon Company. It does seem like they are actually going for something that feels, quote unquote, next generation asterisk for Game Freak. I mean, that's where we are with Game Freak right now. It's not like Scarlet and Violet lowered the bar pretty far at this time, like to where we're hoping maybe it'll just be functional and it won't be all glitchy and terrible performance. But I do think they're going to have a game or two games, again, Wind and Wave, that will be better than expected coming off of Scarlet and Violet. We're just shooting for slightly above average. But I do think they'll hit it, and I think it'll do really well because guess what? It's Pokemon. Otherwise, though, there could be some other offshoot games. I'm sure tons of merchandise, cards, whatever else they can put the number 30 on for the anniversary. And I'm sure, once again, make a bunch of money throughout this year for that anniversary. But let me know what you're hoping to see during the Pokemon Presents happening later this Friday. And in our last bit of news, let's talk a bit more about that Xbox shakeup that happened to close out last week. And I already went over this in a video, but now with Asha Sharma running the Microsoft, CEO of Microsoft Gaming, and then having Matt Booty being promoted into a higher up role, and then Phil Spencer and Sarah Bond out at Xbox. All this happened like so quickly. It was just like a press release went out, a bunch of different news sites immediately dropped the information, and then it was just off to the races from there. But over the weekend, something interesting happened as Asha Sharma had made an X account, or at least shared their gamer tag, which they seemed to make at the beginning of this year. And they've been playing games since then, showing off a bunch of games that they've been trying out. Things like Forza's in there, Keeper and others. Seemingly just trying to get caught up and do her homework on the Xbox brand and where they are right now. But to go off of that, she just started talking with people on X in an oddly generic way. I guess that's a good phrase for describing what was being said. So she said things like, should I bring back the blade system? Which was odd to me because her first statement when she introduced herself is, I'm going to learn or understand what this is and protect it for Xbox. So I don't really know how she'd go, well, yeah, obviously the blade system. It's 20 years ago on the Xbox 3. There are people who are really in Xbox now for the Xbox series that probably don't know what the blade system is because it's 20 years old. So it's interesting to see her come in and just call out something that is beloved in the old person Xbox fandom. But it's kind of that sense of, guys, I got you. I know about the blade system. And then she also responded, hear you, when it came to exclusives, but I don't think Microsoft's going to be able to all of a sudden about face and just not put games on the PlayStation and the Switch too. It's that ship seems to have sailed at this point because it's what Satya Nadella wants. So it's just very weird to see all the activity on social media that eventually broke down into what people were looking at as, hold on, is this like an AI bot or an agent that's responding to people? And she's coming over from Core AI, so she has a lot of the fundamental understanding of how to even do that now. So yeah, it very well could be that, especially on a weekend. And well, hey, that's the big thing right now. She can say a lot. A lot of the Xbox executives certainly said a lot. It's going to come down to the actions that are taken. Is there a big shakeup in mind that she has that she wants to do? Like completely restructure Game Pass, try to put more of a focus on the console in different ways, make it more appealing rather than kind of push it into the background like what was happening with the previous run for the Xbox series. So a lot of questions right now that need to be answered with less social media and just more action. And before we go to the comment of the day, we'll take a look at the poll that I posted up yesterday, where I ask, do you currently own an Xbox Series console? 61% say no, 39% say yes. And look, she's got her work cut out for her. I mean, Phil Spencer had his work cut out for him back coming off of Don Matrick with the Xbox One that was disastrous. And it seemed like Microsoft's ready to just completely shutter the Xbox division. That was the word going around. And instead, they end up buying Mojang and Minecraft, which was probably one of the best acquisitions we've seen so far in gaming, as that's continued to roll along and just print money. I mean, they bought them for less than Bungie. Like, that's pretty good then, I'd say. But right now, the Xbox console is just very unappealing. It's not selling well. So somehow she needs to turn that around, while apparently going into a new generation where it's just going to be a very expensive system that could eclipse $1,000 for the console. And it's talking more and more about putting games everywhere. Good luck. But hey, her Asha Sharma, apparently, her claim to fame here, her biggest trait that's really working in her favor is she's very good when it comes to user acquisition, getting more and more people on to use a platform. And that's really what Xbox needs right now. So maybe this is what the division needs, and I guess we'll find out here starting this year. And we'll finish up with the comment of the day, as you're seeing here. This is from Mower, who says, closing Bluepoint, who made good games, and no game from Naughty Dog this whole generation. Slow clap. Well done, Sony, well done. And the thing is crazy is the reason for both of those seems to be live service. And look, people already get really frustrated with Sony or just live service games outright. But then you hear and start to put the pieces together. It's like, that's why we don't have a Naughty Dog game, actually. It's because The Last of Us Online was a live service game rather than just being Factions 2. They could have done a smaller multiplayer game that maybe wouldn't have taken that long to develop and released it as a standalone multiplayer game. Sure, maybe it wouldn't have been $70, but could have been 40 or 50, and you release it, and then you move on to the next thing. That's the thing that gets me. It's like these games, for some reason, have to be forever games. And it's like, no, they don't. That's just not how it has to be. So I also get concerned about their infatuation with live service games to where they have a lot of users, but a lot of the users on PlayStation are playing Fortnite, Apex Legends, and Madden, and games that they buy or just play through free-to-play means with microtransactions, and that's it. That's consistently all they play. So you're already on your back foot because you're not even going to have a chance with most of those users. And now you're in a smaller pool to where you're trying to pull them in all directions for multiple live service games at once. And some of them might not even get out of the gate. Like you have Fair Games. Is anyone like, when that logo comes back up, is anyone going to be like, finally, we get to see Fair Games again? No, they're going to go, why does this game still exist? So hasn't been a great run when it comes to the live service push outside of something like Helldivers 2. But hey, the PS5 keeps rolling along. It's making a ton of money for them. But I do wonder if that's more so Sony's doing or just them happen to be the default console and everybody just wants to play Fortnite. And ladies and gentlemen, that's going to do it here for Newswave. If you enjoyed this video, guys, hit that like button. If not, hit the dislike. Leave comments down below about everything we talked about here today. If you missed last week's Newswave, I'll leave it in a card. Or maybe you want to check out a retro pickup that I did. I did a video where I ordered some from GameStop to see how they would turn up. And yeah, there's some PlayStation Vita games in there, all right. I'll leave that in the video right below. Thanks, guys, for watching, and I'll see you next time.